All right. So this is the day two recap. It is 9:38 Central Time, which means it's 10:38 Tampa time. And so it's pretty late, but I just got out of a Bible study. I walked to a congregation that was near my Airbnb, and we were in there for almost 3 hours. So that was really interesting. Maybe that's just how they do it in Tampa. Don't know. But this is the day two recap of Offer Mastery Live 2024. If you don't know what that is, I will have a link in the description to my day one recap where I talk about what Offer Mastery Live is. That's where I am. I'm in Tampa for today and tomorrow as well. It's a 3 day conference here in Tampa, Florida. So the speakers for today were Dr. Benjamin Hardy, well-known organizational psychologist and best-selling author; Rick Williams, the wealth coach; Nat C. Jones, speaker and success coach; Annie Grace, who is the author of This Naked Mind and The Alcohol Experiment, I believe are two of her books; and then Myron Golden, of course, entrepreneur, business coach, consultant. He's the guy that put on this conference this week. So it started with Myron. He's talking about offers the entire week, and he had a few interesting things to say in his opening keynote. One of the things he said really early on today was that many entrepreneurs struggle because they underprice their offer. You would think maybe it's the other way around, but he talked a lot about how much offers being underpriced is actually not even helpful to the people who might be buying them. So that was an interesting point he made. One of the things he said is that we should let people that we're selling to, if we're entrepreneurs, give the content, and then we can provide the context. So he talked about content as being the facts of a situation and the context as being the frame around them. So I can choose what things to focus on, and that way you can be positive or negative depending on what the situation. This was a really interesting idea about the feelings that you can help to convey towards people or help to bring out of people who might be considering an offer that you're making. Anticipation is the energy you get when the outcome you expect is desirable. And so the idea there is, if you're believing that the future is bright, you will anticipate it. But the opposite is true when you don't. So anxiety is the energy you get, or the wasted energy that comes when the outcome that you don't want, that outcome that is undesirable, is the one that you really believe in. So that was an interesting thing that he had to say. Benjamin Hardy spoke this morning on rapid transformation. He has a book that is not out yet, but it's coming. He kind of had a copy of it to show us, but he's writing this book on rapid transformation. He talked about the three main things that go into transforming yourself and your life rapidly. Those three things are frame, floor, and focus. And what he says is, if you want to transform yourself rapidly, you need to do that by changing your frame, raising it basically, which also results in raising your floor, and then making the future your focus. And so the frame is what you see, and again, you might think of frame and focus as being similar. There's a sense in which that's true, but in his wording here, it's not the same thing. So the frame is what you see, what you have a vision of. The floor is what you do, and specifically what you don't do. It's a standard. You want to raise your floor so that the things that previously were acceptable things to do are no longer acceptable. So you raise your floor, and then you focus on the future rather than on the past or on the present. Often the thing he pointed out is that we think about the present and we use that to determine our future rather than looking at the desired future and using that to frame our present and our past as well. He talked about Elon Musk, and he said that there are 5 steps to change. We know that Elon Musk is one of the most well-known entrepreneurs in the world, one of the richest men on the planet, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX and other companies as well. And so Dr. Ben talked about these 5 steps that Elon Musk laid out for change. And the first one is to question the requirements. Sometimes we see certain requirements, or we assume certain requirements rather than questioning whether or not they are true. And when you're changing your frame or your focus or your floor, one of the things you'll need to do is question the requirements, because you might find out that the things that you think are required actually aren't. Second thing is to remove more than you think. So there should be a lot of things that are being removed to make space for the things that you want to do. And that's where changing your frame and your floor and your focus come in. That it's better to actually remove too much and have to add something back in than to not remove enough, not raise your floor high enough. Simplify and optimize. So after you've questioned the requirements, taken out a bunch of things, then you can begin to simplify and optimize when you have fewer things that are there. Then accelerate, and then finally automate. And so if you do those things, those are Elon Musk's 5 steps to change. So after Dr. Ben spoke, then he and Myron together got on the stage, answered some questions from the audience, and they kind of riffed off of each other and had a lot of interesting things to say. One question came up on the topic of leverage, and Myron had an interesting quote. He said, "You can always make up in leverage what you lack in ability." The idea of leverage is the idea of being able to put small inputs in, but be able to get disproportionate outputs from smaller inputs, or smaller, putting in a small amount of effort or force or strength can result in a disproportionately large outcome. And so you should think in those terms. Dr. Benjamin Hardy on leverage said, if what you're focusing on doesn't have high upside, you're focusing on the wrong thing. So he's basically saying we should be focusing on high leverage activities, high leverage relationships. If what we're focusing on doesn't have high upside, we should probably be focusing on other things, particularly if there are bottlenecks in business. So next, Myron Golden had a few minutes before time for lunch, and he had some interesting things to say on values. One of the questions he asked was, where do values actually come from? And he basically gave 3 answers. One place values come from is from our past. Sometimes past perceived voids create present pursued values. So for example, if you were someone who didn't grow up with a lot of money or didn't grow up having nice clothes, that was the example he used. He said because of that, he wears nice clothes now. And so that becomes something that he is presently valuing, nice clothes, because in his past, he didn't have that. The second thing is that you can have present perceived virtues that create present perceived values. That simply means whatever you believe in now creates value for you now. And so figuring out what people believe in, you get a sense of what their values are. That makes sense. But then the other thing he said was that future perceived visions create present pursued values. So the idea there is that the vision of what you want in your future, which is why all of us are at the conference, right? We want to have a different future. We want to start businesses or scale up businesses that we already have. Because of that, we placed a value on being here this week. And so future perceived visions, present perceived virtues, past perceived voids, these are all things that create things that we value presently. So then we went to lunch. And so lunch was good again today. We had a little under 90 minutes today. And so I was sitting at a table. I go sit at a table. There was a guy that was at the table that I sat with yesterday. And so I saw him and I recognized him. And there was somebody I saw, because there are only a handful of people that I know. And they're all people that I've met. It's interesting. I saw a guy that does a podcast. I think I saw the comedian Michael Jr. here. There's some interesting people that I've seen online before, and now I'm seeing them in person. But I went to lunch today and sat at a table, and there were 3 ladies already at the table. And so he and I kind of sat down. He sat closer to one lady, and I sat closer to these other 2 ladies. And we all were kind of having a single conversation. And then somehow it became me talking to these 2 ladies that were to my left, and he was kind of talking to the lady that was to his left. And so it ended up being 2 conversations, but it was really interesting. One of the ladies there is a former nurse, or I think she may currently still be a nurse, but she has 5 children and she homeschools them. And she has all of this knowledge about holistic medicine. So there were just a lot of interesting conversations that we had during that lunchtime. The other young lady is someone who is also a mother, and she actually is on Instagram and she sells different types of tea. I'm going to link both of them in the description. Those 2 ladies that I met today, but it was just a really interesting lunch. Got to learn a lot about mothers. They were talking about postpartum, and I'm thinking postpartum depression, but postpartum just means after you have the baby. And so they had to help me with some things, but it was a really interesting conversation. the nurse, she immediately went to my YouTube channel and she followed me. I told them I was a robotics engineer, and she said, "Oh, well, I'll for sure, if you have content on there, my kids would love to learn about robots and would love to learn about AI and the stuff, whatever you're doing online. So we're going to be following you and seeing if you have new content up." So that was a really interesting thing and encouraging. And the other lady, I was talking to her because my sister just had a baby back in February. And so I was asking all of these questions about the baby, and maybe we could use tea to help the baby go to sleep because the baby's not going to sleep. But they were just really encouraging me to be more helpful to my sister. I try to do that when I'm in town, and take the baby and take my nephew, and we go walk around and give my sister a little bit of time to rest. But it was just a really interesting lunch. We connected, and that's one of the big things about this week. And the lunches have been good so far, and looking forward to tomorrow as well. After lunch, it was interesting that the MC made a mistake and sent out Rick Williams, the wealth coach, next. And actually, I think Myron was supposed to come out next, but it all worked out. If you're familiar with Rick Williams, the health coach or the wealth coach on YouTube, he's always singing, and he was singing today too. He said several interesting things. One was to recognize your resources. Sometimes we don't see the resources that are right there in front of us that we have access to. Then he said this interesting thing: learn how to sweep before you mop. And so he was given the analogy that you need to sweep up dirt or dust first before you use a mop. You don't just mop when the floor needs to be swept up. And essentially what he was saying there is that you want to produce content and build trust with people who might be following you or might be interested in what the kind of work that you're doing before you mop up profits, is what he was essentially saying. Sometimes people want to go right into how can I make money? How can I get people to pay me? And you haven't spent the time to produce content and build trust with your audience. And so he said this: every client is a time client before they become a money client. They actually invest time in you first before they ever invest money. And so one of the things he said was that you should, in order to make money fast, you should accept money slowly. And so that was an interesting and maybe perhaps counterintuitive way of looking at it. The next person was Natsy Jones. She talked about teamwork. Actually, Myron was next, but I'll talk a little bit more about some things Myron said later because he had maybe 3 or 4 different keynotes today. But Natsy Jones talked about teamwork. She said this specifically: they say teamwork makes the dream work, but Nat says the team is the dream. So we should focus on our teams. We should focus on building a squad. This was something she repeated over and over again: build a squad and have that squad help you move to the next level. And so she had this dolphin analogy where she talked about how dolphins do this thing where they find a school of fish, and then the dolphins begin to swim really rapidly around that school of fish. And one of the things it does is it creates this underwater tornado that basically takes the fish and sucks them down, kind of in this vortex, down to a point where one of the dolphins can come out of that circle that's swimming around rapidly at the top. The dolphin can go to the bottom, open its mouth, and the fish just kind of shoot into its mouth. Then the dolphin gets full, it goes back up, goes into the circle, keeps going. And so each of the hungry dolphins will go down, get their full, go back up to the top, then circle some more with the other dolphins. And they do this until none of the dolphins are hungry anymore. And so she used this to say that this is what we should do when we're building teams as well: make sure everyone's taken care of. And so she said something similar to Rick in this idea of how we don't often recognize resources. She said, I have nothing but blank. And we all can look at the things we have. One of the things I've recognized this week is how much I've downplayed my robotics and AI background. And when I tell people that that's my background, people just all of a sudden have all these ideas for things I could be doing. And I have not generally seen it that way. And so it's really opened my eyes this week. I have nothing. So in my case, I have nothing but this robotics and AI stuff that I've worked on. And I don't realize how valuable that is. And she says, and that's more than enough. And so for me, to think of it that way and say, there are people that are probably looking for the kind of content that I could potentially put out. So I will be putting more stuff on robotics and AI on the YouTube channel, and really get back to doing that much more consistently. Annie Grace is we said before, she's the author of this book called This Naked Mind. She talked a lot about her previous struggles with misusing alcohol, and how she came out of that, and how she's used that to write books and build a business around it. She says, in the midpoint between stability and variety is the edge of chaos. And she said, we really need to try to be in that place where we don't go so far to one side of just caring about stability, or we don't go so far to the other side is that all we want is variety, and we can never find that happy medium. She said that chaos is that point right there in the middle of stability and variety. She talked about Myron and said when she had met him, she found that he was someone who was confident, and she equates confidence to the sum of belief plus experience. And so he made an offer to her. He essentially told her, that she should consider paying $25,000 to get some coaching from him. She did that, and it really changed her business for the better. But she was able to do that because of his great deal of belief, as well as the experience that she saw him as well. And that gave her confidence, and it meant that he also exuded confidence as well. Myron said to her when he was basically telling her that she needed to change the way she was doing things in her business, if you love these people, you have to make them an offer. She was only wanting to just provide a service to them and not make an offer to do more for them. And so he said, if you love these people, you have to make them an offer. And of course she did that, and her business has taken off dramatically. So one of the things he said towards the end of today's session was he went to scripture and talked about Solomon's business model. And this is an interesting thing that he talks about on other videos. He said that Solomon's business model is basically composed of three things. One is that he was a consultant to his contemporaries. So if you look at someone like the Queen of Sheba, who traveled to, Jerusalem to meet with Solomon and to learn more about running her kingdom, he was a consultant to his contemporaries, and the scripture says that she actually paid him handsomely for that. The next thing he says that Solomon did is that he communicated to crowds. And so the scripture also says that other kings of the earth also came to Solomon. And so Myron makes the point that if, in order for him to be as well known and communicating as extensively as he did, for example, all of the Proverbs and all of the songs that he wrote, he had to be a communicator to crowds, and this would have been something that would have been lucrative as well. And then finally, he had what Myron calls continuity cash flow, meaning he was paid yearly, which would be on a continual or repeated basis. And so Myron essentially said, well, I saw that business model and I decided I wanted to do the same thing. I'm going to consult my contemporaries, I'm going to communicate to crowds, and I'm going to have continuity cash flow. So that's an interesting way of seeing that. And so, of course, if you were to do those things, you can expect to be much wealthier than you currently are, even if you don't get to the wealth of Solomon. So that's day 2 of Offer Mastery Live 2024. There are a lot of other things that happened besides that. He made this offer to a lot of the people that were there, and to give them an opportunity to work with him and his team, to do challenges. And that was something that at this time I'm not able to do, but I did learn a lot about challenges today, and we'll probably look to implement that in the coming weeks. So that's day 2. Come back to the channel tomorrow for day 3. I will have to fly out from Tampa to Nashville as soon as I end tomorrow. But when I get back to Nashville, I will, or maybe even in the airport, I might take some time in the airport to do the day 3 recap. I'm not sure if it's going to be quiet enough to do that, but no matter what, I will get that recap done tomorrow and get that put up on the channel. And just in general, I will be a lot more consistent with the content. So until next time, I will see you later, and thanks for watching.